Have you ever wondered what gear you might need to get into astrophotography? Or maybe you're already an astro shooter and just wondering what your next setup might be? Well, in today's video, I'm going to go through 5 different setups that you can shoot the night sky with. Something simple like this, all the way up to a big dedicated rig like this. And I'm ranking them against each other on 4 criteria: ease of setup, ease of shooting, ease of processing, potential quality of the final image. Now, it's important to know with these rankings that a C, for example, doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It's just how it sits compared to all the other gear. And I'll be showing you an image in a little bit which is in that C tier of quality, but I've sold numerous prints of it worth over $1,000 each. So by the end of this video, you're going to have a good idea of what setup might suit what you want to do and what you want to get out of your astrophotography. Let's start off with the simplest. So what's our first contender? It's a smartphone. I'm not joking. Most smartphones made in the last 5 years or so have the ability to take photos of the night sky, and in particular are able to capture the Milky Way in color. So ease of setup, it's an S. I'm set up for astro with my mobile. I'm not joking. You can, of course, use a tripod and you'll get longer exposures, but for the setup, you just got to point it to the night sky, hit that exposure button, and away it goes. It's an S. For shooting, it's also an S, like tap, and you're away doing astro. Doesn't get easier than that. For the processing, I'm going to give it an A, mainly because the phone is going to do all the heavy lifting for you. Just like daytime photography, you know, when you go and take an image and open it up for a moment there, it's a bit flat and then it pops. So the phone is doing all of this back of house editing for you, noise reduction, saturating, boosting the colors, etc. So it's nice and easy. You can take it into Lightroom Mobile or similar and do some editing yourself and get it along even a bit further, but you don't have to. Quality of a final image, it's a D. But I've seen people's reactions who have never done any astrophotography at all and captured the Milky Way with their phone, and they are just blown away. There's grandmothers who have caught the aurora when there's the big storms on, especially in the Northern Hemisphere. They may never take another astro photo again, but they are going to be so proud of what's in the phone. If the image is ever only going to be on your phone or social media, it's going to look great. Don't take my word for it. Here's some images from friend of the channel, Shane Mostyn, who has his own channel dedicated to mobile phone astrophotography. And have a look at these great images that he's produced with nothing more than his phone. But when you do start pixel peeping, pinching in a bit, this is when it starts to fall down. We see a lot of artifacts from this processing that the phone is doing. So for the simplest setup, a lot of people don't know that they've actually got an observatory sitting in their pocket. Get out there, give it a go. So what's next? Standard camera, standard wide-angle lens, and a standard tripod. This is where most people actually start their astrophotography journey, and often with gear that they already have. With this sort of setup, you're typically shooting really wide, including a landscape element as well as the night sky, because you're forced into using wide-angle lenses, anything from 14mm up to maybe 24mm. So to the setup, I'm going to give this a B. It's not that it's difficult, but there is more involved. You've got to do your composition, you've got to get the lens focus. That can sometimes be a challenge, especially when you're new to it. It takes a bit of practice and repetition. You need to sort out your exposure time. You need to know some other settings in the camera, such as your ISO and your aperture. So it's more hands-on and it's more involved. It's not a steep learning curve, and most can get started in their first night. So for shooting, it's an A. Once you're all set up, you just got to hit the trigger now and away we go. You might do some more advanced things like continuous exposures so you can make a star trail image, or taking repeated exposures with the goal to stack them. But I'm going to be keeping it simple for this video, and we'll just treat it as these single exposures, 10 to 25 seconds. Into processing, it's a B. For astro with normal cameras like these, you really want to be shooting in RAW. You can shoot astro in JPEG and you'll get some nice images out of them, but your ability to edit them compared to a RAW file, which has so much more data behind it. So now we need something like Lightroom and maybe Photoshop. It doesn't mean a lot of work and the learning curve isn't too bad, but it does mean that there's a little bit more effort to be put in to get more out of the image. To the image quality, okay, this one's going to be contentious. It's a C. You might have thought that it was going to be higher than that, but it's a C relative to the other rigs. And have a look at this Milky Way panorama that I shot down in Tasmania a few years ago. I have sold this image as a 1.5 meter wide print multiple times for over $1,000 each time. So just because I've said it's a C, it doesn't mean that you can't take great saleable images with just a standard setup like this. Okay, what's this setup? Looks very similar to the last, but you'll notice between the camera and the tripod is a star tracker. This is my Nomad Move Shoot Move, and this is my older tracker. It's a Skywatcher Star Adventurer. This sort of setup is what you graduate to when you want to reach deeper into the night sky. So we're no longer restrained to really wide angle lenses. We can use lenses 24 to 100, 200 mil even. And it also allows us to have longer exposures at lower ISOs, and it will follow the night sky so the stars get nice and sharp. You can still do wide field landscape astrophotography, but now you can also start reaching in and getting into some nebula detail, or like the Orion Nebula, for example, and it starts leveling up your game. So for the setup, it's a C. The learning curve really commences at this point. So it's similar in the setup to the last rig in that you still need to compose, work out your exposure times, get focus, etc. But you also need to do something that's called polar alignment. To explain that super briefly, we need the tracker pointing very precisely to the south celestial pole, or maybe for you the north celestial pole, depending on which hemisphere you're in. And doing that can be time consuming, can be fiddly, can be frustrating, especially in the beginning. And with these sorts of setups, it's all on you to do it. And you can kind of get to the end and you're all happy, and then you kick the tripod and you've got to start over. So a lot more effort in the setup with this sort of gear. The shooting, it's a B. Now the shooting isn't too dissimilar from last time, that once you get everything set up, you've just got to have it go. But once you do start using trackers, the whole goal is to be able to shoot for longer, like 15 minutes at least, if not an hour or so. And our exposures can be longer as well, like being a minute or 2 minutes. The ease of shooting is really the time now that you have to spend in the field to really get the results that these can offer you. Ease of processing, yep, this is when it's getting tough. It's a C. Why is it a C? Because now we need specialized software to do things like stacking, which is taking many multiple images that you might have shot over a 1 hour session, and it lays them all on top of each other, blends them together. Now, the result of this is we have clearer, cleaner images, less noise, more detail, a lot more structure, that kind of thing. But it does mean you need to learn some new skills, software like Deep Sky Stacker, Cyril, PixInsight, many others. These are really specialist pieces of software, and Lightroom doesn't have the ability to do this stacking for you. So getting through that learning curve can be a little tough. It's not easy. I mean, it's easy once you're on the other side of it, but you get what I'm saying. And to the final image, it's a B, okay? The differentiator between this and the last setup, as far as image quality wise, because we can stack multiple images, it helps reduce the noise. So have a look at the difference of this single frame of the Rho Nebula versus 15 minutes worth of shooting. Have a look at how much noise I was able to get rid of, even with that little amount of effort. And also with a setup like this, because we're no longer restricted to shorter focal lengths, we can actually get away from just doing landscape orientated astrophotography, and we can reach further into the sky, really starting to change up what's possible with your camera. Now, I do want to clarify something on this whole ease of setup and shooting part. The 3 different rigs that you just saw, you really need to be in some properly dark skies. You can't really use it in a city or a large town. You need to get away from light pollution. So if you're in a medium-sized city, this is getting a good 30 minutes away. So some of that ease is kind of offset by the effort you need to get out somewhere for those darker skies. Whereas these next 2 setups you're about to see, it's less of an issue. Okay, now things get really different. Smart telescopes. Smart telescopes can make you a deep sky astrophotographer in your first night without knowing a thing about astrophotography. They have really exploded onto the scene in the last few years with a lot of different manufacturers making all sorts of different smart telescopes. We're not doing wide field landscape with these anymore. They're designed to look deep into the sky. So we're chasing nebula, we're chasing galaxies, etc. The setup with smart telescopes, you'd almost think it's an S, but I'm still going to give it an A because there is a little bit of hands-on. We do have to make sure that they are properly level, but as far as the rest of the setup is concerned, these things will autofocus, they will find their place in the sky, they'll go to the target that you want just by pushing a few buttons on your phone. It really is quite easy. For the shooting, I'm giving this S tier, and there's a reason for that. We're now at a level of possibilities where there's a lot of complex things going on behind the scenes. Exposure timings, the amount of photos that it takes, the processing, the following the sky. It's all very, very involved, and you don't have to do any of it. As to the processing, I'm giving this equally an S and a D. Why is that? So most of your smart telescopes will actually do all the processing on board. So as the images come in, it'll continuously stack them and apply the noise reduction, do all of the editing. And if nothing else, at the end of the shoot, you have a fully stacked, processed image straight out of the scope. But you also have the ability to take all the raw files from it and an unprocessed image and do it yourself. Similar to the last setup, you're going to be using complex software, doing very specific tasks like stacking, etc. And the learning curve and the effort that now goes into the editing is substantially higher. So for me, that's why it's both an S and a D for the processing. The great news is that for you to start out, you're not forced down the rabbit hole, and you can spend a season getting a whole library of amazing targets with very, very little effort. And what about the final result? Well, this too is a mix. I'm going to say a C and an A. What do I mean by that? So the C level is not because it's bad, but because all the processing is being done on board. If you shoot the same target, say the Orion Nebula, as somebody else over a similar period of time, and you both just let the smart telescope do the processing for you, there's going to be a small element of, I feel like I've seen this image before, a bit samey same. So it's kind of losing the opportunity to be a bit unique and to add your own flair to the image. However, if you do the other side of the processing where you've taken the raw files yourself, done all the stacking, done all the editing, etc., now you're putting your own stamp on the image, and you're just going to have something that looks different, feels different to the other images taken with the same smart telescope. So it's not a bad thing, and honestly, if you're new to astrophotography and get a smart telescope, I'd avoid learning how to edit yourself for quite a while. The learning curve is very steep on it and can get really, really frustrating and a little bit expensive too, sometimes the software that you need. So yeah, I'm not poo-pooing the C tier, and if that's what you do, you're gonna love it. Okay, we've made it. This is not necessarily the end goal, but it is the end game. So with this sort of setup, we're now getting into some properly deep sky imaging, and roll your own. You can configure it any which way. You can get multiple telescopes of different focal lengths, different cameras, different filters, highly customizable. Unfortunately though, now you don't have to spend a lot of money when you start going down this path, but even though normal photography can get quite expensive if you choose to go down that path, starting down this journey has the potential to be that dumpster fire that you're trying to put out by throwing money into it. It's just not going to happen. It truly has the potential to take every last cent that you've got. How far you go is really up to you, of course. So, setting up. You probably guessed it already, it's a D. Usual time to set up something like this, anywhere from 15 minutes to half an hour. And by setting up, it's assembling the whole thing because this weighs a lot. You don't just carry this around under your arm. You've got batteries, you've got cables, you've still got to do your polar aligning, and then you've got to get it focused, and then you've got to calibrate the guiding. There is just so much going on, and it can be a big learning curve. So a D for a setup. Now, as to the shooting, a C might sound a little bit funny for this because they are usually computer controlled, and that whole once it's set up and it's off and running, it's like, well, it looks after itself, doesn't it? Yes, but the learning curve to get there, to know how to configure it for shooting, for how long, for the exposures, to make sure that you've told it to autofocus every couple of hours, etc. There's just a bit going on. And to be honest, to get the most out of them, you really want them running for hours. You want hundreds of 3-minute exposures, and you've also got to capture things that are called calibration frames, so darks, flats, etc. I'm not going to go into it, just know that it's something else to learn when you get to this level of equipment. The processing, it's an outright D. It's an outright D. So we're at the most complex level of, for us mere mortals at any rate, of doing astrophotography and the editing. While some systems can do an auto stack internally, it is still nowhere near as good, in my opinion, as doing the editing yourself. So even though some systems, including mine, I've got a little ASI Air Pro up there, it can do an auto stack of my imaging session for me, but it's nowhere near as good as what I'm able to do myself, taking it into PixInsight and using other tools to stack and edit the images. And final, image quality. Now, assuming you have cut your teeth, learned how to process, gone on that very painful journey, it's not fun. We are absolutely at the S tier of imagery for astrophotography. Nothing can really rival with 16+ hours on a single target to get such color and depth and detail. But here's the thing. It's not necessarily the highest scoring best image outcome that you should be striving for. I mean, some people more than happy to spend overnight having their rig image for hours and hours, and then spend hours and hours the following night editing and processing those images. Whereas somebody else, half an hour with a smart telescope, just hopping from target to target, that sounds like a lot of fun. Or getting out there for some wide field landscape astrophotography. Beautiful images can be achieved with really basic camera equipment. So it's not the highest scoring that you should be looking to, but it's the one that's going to get you out under the stars.